We're here to talk about energy and saving energy in your home, which is, more and more important as energy prices go up, right? So this is called what we call the ButtonUP workshop. It's put on by NHSaves, which is basically a kind of just a trade name that they use for this program. It's a rebate program that can help you with some of the things we'll talk about at the end. It's put on by the different utilities here in New Hampshire. I believe East Kingston is Unitil. Are there any parts that are another utility, or is it all Unitil? Okay, because some towns are kind of split. Like Lee is like half Eversource, half Co-op. Portsmouth is half Unitil, half Eversource. So there's different situations in different towns. But for the most part, things are all the same. Let's see what else. Well, it sounds like you guys are all familiar with the library. So if you need the bathrooms, they're over there. Fire exits are over to the left and the right and front if we need that. Snacks are over there. Feel free to get up and get snacks while we're talking tonight. I do have a whole bunch of different brochures over there with a bunch of information that you can take with you if you want at the end. You will have a PDF available through the library if you want, so don't feel like you have to remember everything I say or take notes or anything like that if you don't want to. I do talk really fast. I apologize for that. I'll try to enunciate and go as slow as I can, but I get pretty passionate sometimes. And there's a lot of information in this program. We've had to cut out a bunch of stuff just to keep it down in terms of time, but I could go on for days about this stuff if I really wanted to. Oh, that's right. Yeah, we're recording it too. Great. So basically, we're going to go through some real basic things in the beginning that are kind of low level. Stuff you might already know, a little bit basic, but it's important to go through those, make sure everyone's got a good grasp on that. And then we get into sort of some deeper things. We start talking about insulation and what we call the ABCs of this work. At a certain point, your head will kind of be swimming a little bit, like too much information. And then we'll talk about like, well, what do you do now that you have some of this knowledge or that you have some ideas in your head? How do you get some professional help, maybe? And then we'll talk about near the end, we'll kind of round out by telling you a little bit about the NHSaves rebate programs, which are could be a really, really good resource to help pay for a lot of this stuff. So we'll give you all the information on that near the end. There's another place you can go to get a copy of the slideshow. Plymouth Area Renewable Energy is a really good nonprofit group up in Plymouth, and they kind of coordinate this whole ButtonUP workshop series. All right, so let's start with the quiz. Greenest energy. Anyone want to throw out their idea? Solar, that's a good one. I like it. I have solar in my house, but that's not the right answer, though. It's a good answer, but it's not the right answer. Anybody else? What are some other ones that you think some people might suggest? Maybe not you, but someone else. Hydro. Some people are really big fans of hydro because it's, once you make the dam, it's clean energy. It doesn't have any kind of pollution or anything. Of course, the fish don't like it very much, right? Some people are really into wind. Some people, I had a gentleman a few weeks ago talking about nuclear. He thought that was the way to go. Really, kind of a trick question, but the right answer is none of those things. The right answer is to use less energy. That's the greenest thing you could possibly do if you're interested in like having an effect on climate change or something like that, right? So, I mean, like I said, I love solar. I have solar in my house now, but in 20 or 30 years, someone's going to have to do something with those panels when they're at the end of their useful life. The minerals in those panels had to get mined out of the ground. The hydro dams affect fish and wildlife, right? So there's a downside to every way to make energy. Things like oil and propane have even a bigger downside than some of these other renewable energies, but they all have a kind of a cost, right? But there's no cost to just using less energy. Like there's no argument you can make that makes it any worse for people or the planet to use less energy. And that's kind of why I got into doing energy audits. It was about 15 years ago now. I had been a teacher for about 20 years. And I was getting a little burned out of teaching. I was looking for something different. And I thought maybe I would get into, I also rock climb, so I'm really good with heights. So I thought maybe I would become one of those windmill techs that's way up there on the windmills. I thought I could do that. I would really like doing some solar stuff. I was doing some solar stuff, but then I saw a bumper sticker that said, the greenest energy is the energy you're not using. And that really kind of hit home with me and resonated with me. and I decided to kind of go into this line of work. The other reason that I really like doing what I'm doing during the day, which is doing energy audits for folks, is that is anyone new to New Hampshire here? Are we all been here for a while? So we all know that we use a lot of energy in New Hampshire to keep our houses warm, right? I had a customer recently from South Carolina. He had just moved here. And he bought this like rambling old 1850s farmhouse with it. And he's like, oil? Who uses oil? This is crazy. I have an oil boiler in my basement. I'm like, yeah, that's what most of your neighbors have too. Like, it's New Hampshire. You're stuck with propane or oil in most places, But in some places like South Carolina, you have really cheap natural gas or you have really cheap electricity. So no one would ever use something like that down there, He also didn't believe, at one point, he's like, how much longer do I have to heat this house? And I was like, well, we're not even in April yet. Got to at least get through April into May. And he's counting on his fingers. He's like, that's 7 months? And I was like, yeah, like, you're telling me you moved up here and you didn't know that? Like, Chamber of Commerce didn't tell that. Like, Chamber of Commerce sold him on New Hampshire. They talked about all the cool things about New Hampshire, the no income tax, no sales tax, the beaches, lakes, foliage, cool snow, these neat coffee shops and downtowns and the rural, the farms, and didn't tell them get ready to heat your house for 7 months of the year. Get ready to heat with oil or propane, which is super expensive, Oh, and then by the way, like, oh yeah, your house probably wasn't built by a licensed contractor because we don't do that here in New Hampshire. You don't have to be a licensed contractor to build a house like you do like in New Jersey where I came from. Oh, and by the way, some towns don't even have building inspectors. So you could move here and spend millions of dollars on a house and it might not meet, different codes and things because it might not have been inspected. So we spend a lot of money keeping our houses warm. So I'm glad there's like people out there coming up with better refrigerators and stuff. I'm not an engineer, so I couldn't do that work anyway. But even if I could, like that's just a small little piece of the pie, right? The biggest piece of the pie is the space heating, keeping your house warm. So that's where I feel like I could have the most impact is by helping people with that big piece of the pie there. We'll talk about electricity because everyone's got an electric bill, like unless you're off grid or something. But most people just get their bill and they kind of grumble and moan and they write the check or make the payment and then move on. But if you look at the bill, whether it's electronic or on paper, there's a little more information in there sometimes that you can kind of look at. It might help you, with some things and figure some things out. There's usually a little graph that'll show you like how you're doing month to month. This thing, I don't like this thing here where I don't know if Unitil does this here, but it gives you a little thing compared to your neighbors. This is how you're doing. That thing is notoriously unreliable because they don't really know like how many kids are in this house, how big is this house, how small is that house? They don't put that information in there. So sometimes that number, I wouldn't put too much credence in that. But the average family or household, uses about 20 kilowatt hours, per day, which comes out to 600. It's helpful to know sort of like what's using the most energy in your house for electricity. So if you have an electric water heater, that's going to be at the top for sure. That's the biggest thing. If you have some other way of making your hot water, like maybe it's propane or oil or something like that, then your refrigerator is probably the biggest one, which makes sense when you think about it because A, it's big, B, it's on all the time, right? So your washer and your dryer or down here, your entertainment center, like you only use those a little bit each week, right? So no matter how efficient they are, not really going to make that much of a difference in your electric bill. Lighting, it says 1,000 up there. I think that's actually a little bit overstated right now because most people have already gotten into LED lights, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But dehumidifiers is one that actually surprises a lot of people because is there one in here in the library? A little dehumidifier? Now, sometimes there is. It's a cute little white thing.
Our HVAC.
Oh, your HVAC does it, yeah. But typically, people have them in their garage or in their basement. And it's a cute little white thing that comes along. That little thing is using a lot of electricity, despite how cute it might look, because it has a pretty tough job. So I'm not saying don't use one. I'm just saying be aware that it does use a lot of electricity. If you're trying to figure out what something uses, the library here has a device here called the kilowatt meter that you could borrow for a little while. And you could take anything in your house, you can plug it in and you could do some math and you could kind of figure out like, oh, this, TV or whatever, it costs me, $250 a month or whatever it is you want to try to figure out. You can figure out individual items. So that can be kind of helpful. You can take the next step, which is kind of a neat thing that they've developed recently, and they now have whole house electric monitors. So this would monitor every single thing in your house that's using electricity in real time. And you could pull out your phone at work and you could say, oh, look, my daughter just turned the microwave on and she left the garage door open and her light in her room, she left her light on. You can see what's on and what's off and what's using power and what's not, how much it's using. And this can be really handy if you have a high electric bill, but you really can't figure out what's going on, because there might be something that's hardwired in your house, like a well pump or something like that. Or because you can't plug that into one of those little kilowatt meters, it's hardwired in your house. So this little device, it kind of goes into your on your electric panel down in the basement, and it's smart enough to figure out that it can tell the difference between like a vacuum cleaner and a TV and a hair dryer and a light and things like that. So it's kind of neat. Sometimes it has trouble figuring certain things out, and you can teach it. You can say, oh, that thing that you think is a vacuum cleaner is actually, the charger for the lawnmower or something, like whatever it is. You can actually label it and you can give it some names. It says here electrician install. That's kind of a cover your own behind thing I think we have on there. But technically speaking, I believe that they're promoted and marketed towards homeowners to put in. You want to have a little bit of knowledge about electricity to do it, because you do have to open up your electric panel and do a little bit of work in there. So they're a couple $100, but they can be really handy. There's a couple different brands. This screenshot here is from the one called Sense. That's one of the more popular ones that I've seen. And this seems really kind of stupid to put in a slideshow about saving energy, because like, no God, like everyone knows, turn things off, when you're not using them. But you'd be surprised. Like sometimes I'm getting hired by somebody to come to their house to do an energy audit to help them save on energy. And they go outside and they're like, weeding in the backyard or cutting the grass. And I'm going through the house and I hear something in the room and I knock on the door and I open it up and hello, and there's nobody in there, but the TV's on, And then I go, there must be someone in this room, because I hear something else in this room, and I open up, the stereo's on, or there's a space heater on. Then down in the basement, there's a home gym, and there's a TV on down there. It's like, wait a minute, we're trying to save energy, but you got all this stuff on, right? So I think over the years, a lot of us have developed some pretty bad habits. So there's some kind of behavioral modification that can happen sometimes to, just help keep those things in control. There are some certain things in your house that are always using power, right? Anything with like a black box, a charger, anything with a remote control, like a TV, those are always using a little bit of electricity, even when you're not using it. So it's kind of tricky, I think. But that, when I hit the off button on a TV, I think off. Off means zero, but off doesn't mean zero. Off can mean like 20 or 30 watts. So for 22 and a half hours a day, that TV might be using 20 or 30 watts, just sitting there warmed up, ready for you to hit the remote control. When I was a kid, we didn't have that kind of stuff. Like you could come home from school, turn the TV on, and you had a minute or two to go get your milk and cookies. And then by the time you got back to the TV, it was warmed up and it was clear and it was on. But people don't want to wait that long these days, so they're designed to do that. So anything with a clock, that kind of thing. So the way to handle those things would be to plug those into a smart power strip like this, and then if you hit the button on the power strip, it actually shuts the power off to that device. So that can be something that can be pretty handy. As I mentioned, some of you guys might remember the little these look like LEDs, but some of the lights that they came up with years ago for energy efficiency were the CFL bulbs, the little swirly ones, right? They had mercury in them. They flickered. They took forever to come on full strength. They were terrible. I mean, I wish they never got invented, because they really gave a lot of people a bad feeling about energy efficiency lighting. But LED bulbs now, like this one, or the ones that are right here, they don't have mercury in them. They come on right off the bat when you turn them on. They last a long time. They put out really good light, and they use like a fraction of the energy that the bulb that they're replacing usually uses. So sometimes I'm in a house and I might be putting in, let's say somebody has like 10 recessed lights in their kitchen. Well, each one of those old Edison style bulbs is about 75 or 100 watts. And I'm putting in a bulb that's only 9 or 10 watts. So all 10 of the new bulbs I put in don't even equal the energy of one of those bulbs that I took out and threw in the trash. I wouldn't throw it in the trash if it was one of those CFL bulbs because that's mercury. So you got to recycle those. But I'm not sure why that's not showing up very well, but there's a little bit more contrast there. The one thing I would caution you against is getting the ones that are labeled daylight. I know that sounds kind of weird because everyone loves daylight, right? Daylight's awesome, but the spectrum of light that we call daylight in a room feels really kind of, it's bluish. It's like this. It feels kind of like you're sitting in a dentist chair or something. So you really want one that is more like warm white or soft white, they call it. If you want to get scientific, you could look at the Kelvin number. If you want something that's like 2,700 or 3,000, but you don't want the ones that are like 5,000. That's what they call daylight. And they work in dimmers. You can get them for your chandelier in your dining room. You can get like this one here is one of those 3-way bulbs that has low, medium, high. So you could put it like in a light next to your bed, and you could have it on, different settings, low, medium, high. I mean, they really have kind of figured out all the things that people didn't like about the CFL bulbs, and they figured out how to make it better so people have nothing to complain about. They also last a long, long time for the most part. I've heard some stories from some people with some brands where they're having some issues with them, but for the most part, they do last a long time. Again, other really super easy things you can do, throwing in a low flow shower head. There's some people that worry that it's going to be like just a little dribble of water coming out. Most people that I work with, when we put these in, they're like, wow, that thing is awesome. Like it feels like there's more water coming out now than there was before because it's coming out at like a higher pressure. So it usually is not a big deal to have a low flow shower head. And then every time you take a shower, you're going to be saving energy. This pipe wrap you can get at the hardware store. It's really cheap. It's really easy to put on. So if you have like exposed pipes in your basement or up in a knee wall space or something, you can insulate them. That's a really cost-effective, good do-it-yourself kind of thing. Turning down your hot water is a good one for a lot of people. It doesn't need to be like 150 degrees, like where it's steaming. Like that's a scalding risk. It's really dangerous and it's a waste of energy. So 120 is really all you need. And the last thing you can do is you can be like me and wash all your clothes in cold water. This shirt is like 20-something years old, and I don't think it's ever been in hot water or warm water ever. I have some clothes that I do wash in warm water. Like if I'm out in the yard getting all dirty and everything, like that stuff, I kind of have to put hot water, use a hot water cycle. But I found that most of my clothes come out fine just washing them with cold water. You don't really need the hot water. Again, other simple things, you can make sure your dehumidifier is a good one. It's a modern one. It's not from like 1972. Make sure it's set at a good humidity that you want. I think you can still dry your clothes outside in Kingston. Is that true? They haven't passed a law yet or anything, right? Because I did one of these over in Hampton, I think, last fall, and there was a gentleman that came up from Massachusetts to the thing. He's like, "Yeah, my town, Massachusetts, just passed a law that says you can't have a clothesline." He's like, so all the townspeople are like up in arms and they're all going to fight it. So I've heard that there's some condos that do that sometimes. There's condos that have a rule against clotheslines, but so that's free energy from the sun. So we're certainly not going to tell you to go out and get rid of all your appliances and go get Energy Star appliances because that would be pretty bad for the planet and if we all did that. But if you do have something like a washer or dryer that's getting near the end of its life, or if it dies, that's when you should look for that, that Energy Star label, because that will save you some money in the long run. They got a lot of different rebates for Energy Star. You can get them for washers, and dryers, and even like little room purifiers and stuff now. The really most popular one is the refrigerator one, because refrigerators, again, they're using a lot of energy. They're kind of hard to get rid of sometimes. Sometimes like the transfer stations won't even take them sometimes, or they charge. So in this program, they actually sometimes will take your old one away for free. So that's something you can look into. All right, let's move on from electricity to staying warm in your home, because that's kind of what we've all been doing for the last 4 or 5 months. Probably got another month to go of doing that. Maybe even more, but it's going to be like last year. Hopefully this isn't what you look like in your house, you know, it's okay to walk around outside like that, but it's funny that those people I was telling you about from South Carolina, while I was sitting there talking to the gentleman, I heard the little girl in the other room talking to the mom. And she said, she's like, Mom, I'm gonna get in trouble tomorrow at school. My teacher's gonna be mad because I can't get my homework done. My iPad's broke. And I heard the mom say, "Oh, honey, you gotta take your gloves off. You can't use an iPad with gloves on. It only works with bare hands." It was so cold in their house that this girl had like hat and gloves on, you know, so she looked kind of like that. So of course you could always just turn the thermostat down and you could dress like that, but you know, most people don't want to dress like that in their house. Like we want to be warm and save energy at the same time. We don't want to be dressing in slippers and, you know, heavy clothes all the time. So again, starting with the real basic things, what can you do to, you know, save energy on your heat? First of all, you know, you could turn your heat down when you're not in the house for, I would say, an extended period of time, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. If you're just going down to the store to get some milk, don't bother turning your heat down. It's not going to do anything. It doesn't make any sense to do that. But if you have a propane or an oil system like that, and you're going to bed or you're going to work for 8 hours, it definitely will save you some money to turn it down, whatever, 3, 4, 5, 10 degrees, whatever you can get away with. Now, some people will argue like, well, yeah, but then when you come home, you turn the thermostat back up and that thing kicks on. It's got to run for a while to get the house warm again. And that's true, but the energy that it took for the furnace or the boiler to do that is actually less energy than it would have taken just to keep the house the same temperature all day long while you were gone. The only exception to that is if you have a heat pump. Does anyone have a heat pump here? So if you have a heat pumps, part of the reason that they're so efficient and awesome is that it's one of the downsides of the heat pump is that they're not capable of doing that. They're not capable of taking a house or a room and getting it from like 58 or 60 all the way up to 70 in a few minutes when you come home from work. You know, they only put out like really warm air. They're really good at keeping a space one constant temperature 24 hours a day. So you shouldn't do this. Everybody else can do this, but you should. If you're the kind of person that forgets to turn the heat down when you go to work or when you go to bed, programmable thermostat will do it for you. Some people get into the real fancy Wi-Fi enabled ones and everything. I'm not really a big fan of those. You know, first of all, they're just a lot more expensive and they're Wi-Fi enabled. So that automatically means that they're going to be prone to issues and things like that, I think. These little manual program thermostats are much less expensive, and they'll do almost everything the other ones will do. They'll turn it down and up for you at whatever schedule you set it. Can anyone tell how can you tell that window air conditioner doesn't belong there? Yeah.
Doesn't have a coverable roof, and it's in there, and it's still in the window in the wintertime.
Yes, it's got snow on top. Yeah, unless we got one of those really weird early storms in September or something like that. If the snow's falling and hitting your air conditioning, then you missed the boat. You should have already taken that thing out, right? It should be stored somewhere, and the window should be shut. If you have storm windows, like you don't want them like in a stack in your basement or your garage. You want them out there on the windows. You know, your windows should always be latched. That's not just a security thing to keep out, you know, burglars and things, but the window will actually work a little bit better if it's latched. All right, we'll get into some deeper things now. You know, you might think back to some of the stuff you may have learned like in a physics class somewhere along the line, but you know, hot always goes to cold. That's one of the basic laws of physics. It always goes to the coldest thing it can go to. We cannot stop it. All we can do is slow it down as best we can. But we haven't figured out a way of actually stopping that kind of heat loss, right? So when you turned your heat on in September or October, you've been heating it all winter long. You know, the house is warmer than the outside, so heat is always trying to escape, and it's going out toward the cold, right? If it's a hot day, like a 70-degree day, then you won't have this be happening. But if it's anything colder than your house, that's the direction the heat's going to go in. So it's kind of important to remember. You might remember these words from a science class. You know, this is the way that heat moves: conduction, convection, radiation. There's a few other sort of more obscure ones. which we won't even mention. And we're really not going to talk about radiation at all either. We're going to talk about the other two, because those are the two in a building that actually kind of really kind of drives your bills up. So the first one is conduction, and conduction is when heat goes through a solid surface, right? So this person here is going to wish they had a glove on in a second, because they're holding like a metal poker or something into a fire, right? So the heat is going to go right through that metal into their hand, and they're going to drop it, right? So we know certain things are not very good at conducting heat, and we call those insulation or insulators, and that's a good thing. I mean, there are some applications where you, like in a computer system or something like that, or a spaceship or a car, you might want something that's a really good conductor and sends heat very quickly. But in our houses, we want things that don't transfer heat very quickly. That's what we're looking for, right? So a lot of things can be insulators. This is some insulation right here that I saw in a house. It was actually way up in like Walpole, New Hampshire. Similar to this area, very kind of rural, a lot of farms and stuff. Anyone figure out what that is? Want to take a guess? Mice. Well, there were definitely mice up there, probably. This is farm country, so I was thinking it might be something like, it looked to me like it was like straw or hay or chaff from wheat or something. I was like, maybe some farmer waste product from farm or something. Anyway, I looked it up. It turned out it was seaweed. There was a company called the Cabot Company back in like the 20s, I think it was, named after Henry Lodge Cabot? He was a famous explorer, right? So they actually used to take seaweed and dry it out, and then they would bag it up and ship it around, and people would put it in their homes and insulate with it. Back in the 50s, this balsam wool was a big product, a couple inches of that, and you were like, oh, you got an insulated house. That's underwear, pantyhose and underwears. I mean, you're desperate when you're putting your underwear, stuffing it into holes in your house. Like that was an actual picture I took at someone's house. So obviously this stuff, not very modern thing and not very good. Oh, here's another wild one I saw recently. Bedspreads and comforters and chaise lounge cushions and stuff. I mean, I suppose it's helping a little bit, but the mice certainly loved it. This lady swore that it wasn't hers. I believe her because she had just bought the house a few years before that. So they've been there for a long time. So because when I went, she didn't know those up there. I went up there and took some pictures, and I came out. She's like, "How's it look up there?" I'm like, let me show you. You're not going to believe this, So yeah, we don't want to use stuff like that. So we have a lot of different things we use when we insulate houses. We rate these materials with what's called R value, right? So the higher the R value, the better. That's how good is this thing at sort of slowing down that heat flow. One of the more famous ones, or the common ones you probably see around, is fiberglass. This happens to be pink fiberglass, but it comes in other colors, and that's about 3.5 per inch. So depending on how thick it was, that would be your R value. Another product that gets used a lot is blown cellulose, and blown cellulose is this right here. I got it in a bag just because it makes a mess. It's kind of light and fluffy. It's actually made out of recycled newsprint and newspapers and things like that. If you look closely at it, you can actually see some glitter sometimes. Really, really good product. It's got about the same R value as that, but it has a bunch of other really good qualities that fiberglass doesn't have. So this is actually, I think, in most ways, much better. And then you get into some things that have more R value, like this rigid foam board here. This has an R value of like 6 or 7 per inch, and this is 2 inches 6, so that would be about 12. Similar product to this would be spray foam. This comes in a 4x8 sheet, and you cut it up and you put it in places. This is actually comes out of like a truck with big barrels of chemicals, and they put it together and they spray it on the wall, and then it puffs out and it's spray foam. It's got this like texture to it. That has a really good R value too. It's like R6 or R7. It's also a lot more expensive though. So it's not like this is better than that stuff just because it's got a higher R value. Like there's a certain time and a place where you might want to use some of these materials. Yeah, windows, they don't really rate windows with R value. They have a different system, but if they did, the average window, like the windows in this place, are probably only about R3 or R4. So that's not very good. Wood is actually really easy to remember. It's about 1 for every inch, right? So let's say you had a log cabin with like 12-inch logs. That would be R12, at least where it's 12 inches thick. And then but it would be, R12 and then R11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. And then it goes back up again as the lot gets bigger and smaller. So it's only R12 where it's actually 12 inches thick. Like the rest of it's a little bit gonna be less. It's not quite 12 inches thick. Concrete, stone, brick, things like that, granite, like that's all tear. It doesn't matter how thick it is. It's like it's less than 1, per inch. The other thing is that the install quality is very important with these things. So you might buy some fiberglass, at the hardware store, and it might say R30 on it. Well, that doesn't mean that you can just go up in your attic. Usually it comes in rolls. You can't just go up in your attic, unwrap it, and then like step on one end and give it a kick and unroll it across your rafters going up and down and everything. Cause then you're not installing it correctly. It's not going to be R30. The only way to make it R30 is to put it in the right way. And unfortunately, here in New Hampshire, like if I wanted to become a hairdresser, I have to go to the state to get a license to do that. Speaking of which, I just realized I need to get a haircut soon. My hair keeps falling on my face. But to do insulation, any of you guys could become an insulator by next week. You just, go buy the stuff and put your shingle out and say, I'm an insulator. No one's going to stop you. There's no licensing. There's nothing like that in New Hampshire. So some of the insulation that I've seen in a lot of even newer homes is terrible because sometimes there's really no one looking out for it. In terms of our values and like what the building code says, the average house in New Hampshire is kind of over here. I don't know, this says the average attic is R10 to R30, but like I was in a house in Newfields last week that was R1, I guess. It had drywall or plaster and lath. So I give that a little bit of credit, but above that, there was no installation, none at all. So that brings down the average quite a bit, R1. And by code in New Hampshire, at least on paper, if you go to like this website, it says this is what you're supposed to have for R values in your attic, in the walls, in your basement. So the average house in New Hampshire is not even close to where it should be. And I'm talking about older houses, but I'm also talking in some cases about newer or even in some cases new houses.
So the New Hampshire Energy Code on the left, when were those numbers put into?
Oh boy, we're kind of behind. So in some states, they say we're going to adopt the next energy code or building code whenever it comes out. They change it about every 3 years. In New Hampshire, though, we are very hesitant to like automatically do what other states are doing or what the building code says. So we're typically like at least 5 or 6 years behind. So last time I looked, I think we may still be following a 2018 building code or maybe the 21. So, and it's 26 already. So we're like 4 or 5 years behind. And we also, we tend to not adopt everything that's in the new building code. We sort of pick and choose the things we want to follow and things we don't. And we make exceptions for certain things. So again, and there's some towns that don't even have a building inspector. So no matter what it says on paper, the one exception is Durham. Like it was kind of funny for a while. I have to check, it might still be this way, but if you go to this website to learn about this stuff, if let's say you're building a new house, it'll say, oh, click here if you're anywhere in New Hampshire, but if you're in Durham, click here. And you go to another thing and it says, oh, this is what you need to do if you're in Durham, because the residents of Durham voted a long time ago to kind of hold their town to a higher standard than the rest of the state. So in Durham, they're really super strict about it in terms of what you have to do, and everything gets inspected and it has to be done really, really well. So, anyways, yeah. So like I said, install quality matters. This is a picture of an attic where this might be R38 insulation, which is a good insulation level. It's not quite up to code, but it's a lot better than a lot of houses. But you can see all these places here where there's like, you can see wood, you can see drywall, you can see bare sheetrock and things like that. And the average, when you figure out the average R value of that attic, it's actually down to like it's R15 or 20, not 38. So even though it says R38 on the back of the insulation, and the reason is because the heat loss coming from this little part here and this part and that part and this part, that heat loss is so rapid that it sort of works against what the other insulation is trying to do. So that the install quality is really, really important. a lot of different ways that insulation can get messed up. You know, first of all, you could just have not enough of it, right? So this is blown fiberglass actually. These look like they're probably 2x6s and they're sticking up 2 or 3 inches. So that means there's only 2 or 3 inches of insulation in there. You know, that really those tops of these floor joists should be buried in like a foot of insulation. Sometimes you have some spots that are really high, some spots that are really low. So there's like a variation, you know, and then sometimes you have just missing insulation. This was the back of a wall of a place I was looking at in Nashville. It was a really ultra modern new building. And for some reason, when they built it, they put this pre-paint insulation in the wall, but they didn't realize that from here to here, behind that was actually the living room. It wasn't facing the outdoors, it was the living room. So they needed insulation, but it didn't have any in there. This is only, you can only see 3 or 4 bays here, but this went on for like 50 feet. So there was an area that was probably 2 feet high by 50 feet long with no insulation at all. So the heat loss in that little strip was just phenomenal. So at that point, like who cares what's in the wall? If you have empty spots, it doesn't really do anything. A little bit less common, but still out there a lot. I saw it a couple times this week is what we call misaligned insulation. So that means the insulation is not lined up right, it's not in the right place. So this is a situation where somebody decided, like, instead of insulating the floor of their attic, they decided to do the slopes, the slanted part. And sometimes it's actually a good idea to do that. But not in this situation because I mean that's daylight coming through there. There's a fan, it's open to the outdoors. Like, so that would kind of be like insulating these walls really, really well, then leaving the windows open all winter. Like, it doesn't really do much if you leave the windows open. This is kind of like having a window open, right? I mentioned, people kicking the roll of fiberglass. This is somebody that it goes up and down, and underneath there's some wood. So there's a big cold spot underneath there because there's all this space under there. So this is not really going to work very well right here. And this is a situation where I went up through this little hatch here and I looked around into the attic and I look around and there's insulation in the slope, which means that I am technically speaking inside the house. Like it's cold on the other side of that slope and it should be warm where I am. But then I turn around and I look and there's insulation in the walls too that are facing the bedrooms. So it's like, you don't want it in both places. It needs to be one place or the other, but not in both places. So somebody just was confused about this when they put it in. And you could tell because it's different types that it was probably 2 different people at 2 different times. They just didn't really kind of get the whole concept of having one good thermal barrier. All right, so that's conduction. Let's move on to convection and ask this question. Heat rises. How many people have heard that before? Guess what? It's not true. It's false. Heat does not rise. Where does heat go? We just talked about it. It goes to cold, right? So it doesn't matter if the cold is up, down, or left, or right, or north, south, diagonal, whatever. Like heat is always going to go through whatever solid surface it needs to get to the cold thing. It's a little bit of a trick question because there are situations where it appears as if heat is rising, but the heat is actually not rising. What you're looking at is the hot air, and the hot air rises. And that's a little bit different. It sounds like I'm kind of splitting hairs and being a little bit silly with it, but it actually does make a difference. So, right, that's the reason why hot air balloons work, right? So in this hot air balloon, they have a big, gas thing here that fires up and it makes a bunch of heat, and the heat makes the air hot, and hot air does rise. So the hot air rises up and it hits the top of the balloon as long as there's no rips or holes and stuff up there, and it'll actually lift that balloon off the ground. So warm air will rise, but that again, it's not really heat that's rising, it's warm air. And this kind of comes to play in a house in really interesting ways, right? So as soon as you start heating your house, the warm air does rise and it gets to the top, and it virtually never just stops there. It just keeps going. It finds places to get out and escape. But I'm sure no one in here has ever complained that they ran out of air in their house, because all the air that escapes gets replaced by other air down here. So the cold air comes in for free down low to replace all the hot air that's going out at the top. You can notice the same thing. Does anyone here have a wood stove in their house? So if you have a wood stove and it's over here on this wall and you have windows over here, What'll happen is the wood stove will heat up the air. Wood stoves are great. They work really well. They heat up the air rises, and this air up here gets nice and warm, and it gets near the window. But windows are only like R3, like I said, they're cold. So the air cools off and it drops because cold air is dense and it sinks. So it sinks and it comes over here. It's like, now I'm gonna warm up again. I come up here. So you can actually get like a convective loop going on, in a room. We call this the stack effect. It's the stronger, the higher the building is, the more it happens. If you have like a little ranch house, it'll happen. 2-story house, a little bit more. 3-story house, even more. The taller you get, the more this is accentuated. It also gets better, a lot worse the colder it gets. So like one of those stretches we had when it was like -10, like, man, you felt a lot of cold air coming in your house. You didn't really feel the hot air leaving, but it was still happening. So knowing this, this is where those ABCs come in, right? So if you know that the hot air is going to leak out at the top, that air that's leaking out is expensive air because you paid to heat it up, right? You want it to stick around. You don't want it to leave. So it's really important that the first priority be the attic or the top of your house if you don't have an attic. Like you really want to make sure you're keeping that air in. The lowest spot in the house is going to be where most of the cold air is coming in. So that's your second priority. And then counterintuitively, your last priority is the center, which is where everyone lives, right? Most people don't live in the attic or the basement; they live in the center. So it's a little bit goes against a lot of what people think. They worry about the center. They really need to worry about the attic and the basement. So where do you find the leaks? Well, if you're brave enough and you got the gumption to do it, you can go up in your attic and you can look for the leaks. I would definitely recommend that you have a good, probably a better mask than this, but they make really good dust masks. Make sure you get a really good headlamp like this. I don't think you need a hard hat, but you definitely have to be careful because in a lot of homes there's like nails coming through the roof and everything. So you don't want to like hit your head on a nail. You got to be really careful where you step usually, because if you step in the wrong place, you might put your foot right through your ceiling. So if you're going up there, make sure you're careful. But you can start looking around, and chances are you have something like pink fiberglass over your lights or your bath fan. And if you lift that up and look at it, you'll see that it's all black and stained usually. It's not mold or anything like that. It's just pollen and dust from, whatever, the last 10 years or 20 years or 100 years maybe. So air has been sneaking up through this light fixture for that long, and the air goes through this, and like the pollen and the dust gets trapped in there. It's almost like a cigarette butt, basically. You ever look at the end of a cigarette butt, it's all like dark, right? It's the same thing. Electricians have to poke holes into everything to run their wires. And if you pull the insulation away, you'll see all this dark stuff around that hole. It's only a little tiny bit, but it's 24 hours a day for 7 days a week from September all the way into May that this air is leaking out, right? There's usually like a pipe like this for the sewer gases. And if you pull that away, you'll see the dark staining. If you have a chimney going through the middle of your house, you could probably drop a penny down through that hole and it would go all the way down to your basement. Now that's got a gap there for fire code reasons. You're not supposed to have anything flammable right up against that chimney, but there are ways of sealing that up so that you're not constantly just like losing hot air. Even the tops of walls, even in a modern building, the tops of the walls actually leak. So if you move the insulation off the top, this is like a 2x4 top plate. This is probably like, let's say this is the drywall in the bedroom and this is the drywall in the hallway. And you can actually see there's like 2 little black lines here, right where that little crack is, because air is getting into the wall. And there, every wall has electrical sockets in it, and there's a wire that goes across. So air getting into the wall can move across, and then it can go up, and it can come out that little crack. So these are all places that where your expensive air is saying like, say la vie, it's been nice, but I'm out of here. It takes off. So now that you know a little bit about that, what do you think of this attic hatch I saw one day? This is made out of pegboard. Does anyone have pegboard in their garage? Usually pegboard is in your garage and you got hooks and you move the hooks around. Good idea or bad idea? Bad idea, yeah. Even if you put 16 inches of this on top of it, it's still like, that's a good R value, but it's if you left it there long enough and you lifted up the insulation would have all these little dark marks next to every single one of these holes, because air is just, going out through there. Another really good reason to make sure that the warm air in your house stays in your house where it should be is that if that gets up into the attic, the relative humidity of that air is going to change because the temperature is going to change. So it might be really dry air in your house. It might be only, 30–40% relative humidity. But if it gets in the attic, it's going to drop to whatever, 30 or 40 or 50 degrees. And then the relative humidity is going to jack up really, really high. And then you could get a situation like this. So that's not from like a roof leak or anything like that. It's really just because there's so much air from the house getting in the attic that it's like condensing here. Like when I see this, I actually can't tell the person it's mold because I'm not like a mold expert. So I usually say it looks like some kind of microbial growth or something that ServPro or somebody should come in and check out and test. But sometimes I go into attics like in the wintertime and instead of being black like that, it's white. And I touch it and it's cold. I'm like, oh, I can tell the homeowner that's frost. I don't need to take a class or get a certification to know what frost is. The whole underside of the roof sometimes is all, and sometimes the nail heads are all frosty, but sometimes it's just the whole thing. It's just all frosty. So that's a really bad thing long term, for the people and in the house and also for the house itself.
We have a question from someone online.
Sure.
If heat and air conditioning is supplied through ductwork, is this an ineffective way of heating?
No, it's not necessarily automatically an effective way. We have a slide coming up about ducts, but basically ducts should be sealed and they should be insulated, especially if they're not like inside the house, if they're like in the attic or the knee wall spaces. So it's not necessarily a bad way to heat your home or anything, but it does come with sort of a special set of like potential problems or issues. Again, so now that you've done the attic, you go down to the basement. You skip the second floor, you skip the first floor. You don't worry about that stuff at all. And you go all the way down to the basement and you look for things like light coming around your door, or hopefully you have a door. I mean, I'm in homes sometimes where there isn't a door. It's just an opening going to like a bulkhead. You have windows. If you have, sometimes people have little squares of fiberglass up here and what we call the rim joist or the box sill. If you pull that away, sometimes you'll see this black line. It's exactly what we just talked about in the attic. It's just the opposite. So that's cold air coming in from the outdoors to the basement, and it's going through that insulation and it's leaving this, sort of telltale dark marks. It's dust, pollen, and stuff in the air. So these are all places down low where the cold air is coming in. As I mentioned, the center, sometimes you have some opportunities, like you could do some stuff around your doors. If you have old pulley hung windows, if you have a fireplace with like a flue that the damper doesn't work and stuff, like there's some stuff you can do there sometimes, but I wouldn't lose sleep over this stuff, and I wouldn't even put an ounce of effort into it until you do the attic and the basement. Occasionally, though, you do find places that have really big issues in the middle, in the center. This is actually a condo that we looked at in Dover. When I first got there, this was actually covered by some like white vinyl plasticky stuff. Basically, it was like siding, sort of like this siding, but it wasn't tan. And when I pulled it down and looked up there was no sheathing. Sheathing is like wood that's on the outside of a house. Like here there is, but here there isn't. I don't know why. And like the next unit over here, when I pulled that down, was actually solid plywood behind there. I guess when they built it back in the 80s, they had different crews of people doing each condo, and the people that built this condo were like, oh, well, technically that's not a wall, so we don't need to actually put any plywood over it. We'll just stuff some insulation up there. You can see how dark that insulation is because air has been getting sucked up in there, and then it runs along between the first floor and the second floor. So sometimes you have some really weird things going on in the middle of the house, but that's a little bit more rare. Since we're talking about air sealing and sealing up houses, a lot of times this makes people nervous because they've heard this thing before that this saying that houses need to breathe. That's kind of an old school way that a lot of people were sort of taught to build houses in the past. And it really isn't true at all. I mean, people like this lady here, she needs to breathe, and you need to breathe in your house, and you need to have good indoor air quality. You know, you want to have good air. That doesn't mean that your house has to, you know, breathe and have air going through it. And the reality is, almost every house in New Hampshire is way leakier than it could be or should be. So you could tighten up that house so that the warm air stays in and the cold air stays out. And you can save a lot on your energy bills, but you don't have to worry about having, you know, really bad indoor air quality problems. Because there's, you know, because of all these leaks. In new construction, instead of saying like a house needs to breathe, like sort of the newer philosophy or newer way of looking at it is, you know, we call it seal tight and ventilate right. So the idea is you seal up the house really tight so that you don't have to go broke on oil and propane and things. And then you actually do things to get good indoor air quality. So you have something like this HRV system here, or even a high quality bath fan can do it a little bit. But these systems here will take outdoor air and then they'll supply it to your house, and they'll take stale air in your house and they'll send it outside. But there's a heat exchanger in here, so the paths of the air, they don't actually mix, but they pass by each other through a bunch of fins. That way, this thing is not dumping like 20-degree air on top of your bed. And it's not taking 70-degree air from your bedroom and then like just dumping it outside. That would be kind of a waste. So the air it's putting outside is kind of cool because this thing captures some of that heat before it sends it out. So in new construction, in a place that's actually like, you know, enforcing the building code and making houses tight, this is becoming really standard and common in every house. And it's a better way of doing it, right? Like, because this house back here, like this house with all these leaks everywhere, the air is just filtering in through the walls and the fiberglass and the mouse poop and the walls and stuff. Like, who knows what's going on in there? And then you're like, that's not clean air. But if you have a system like this, it's like it's got dedicated ducts that go to the outdoors, so it's actually getting, you know, really good air. So there's, you know, been a pretty big change in building practices. I'll talk about bath fan venting a little bit because it's so terrible, but you know, you never want to use this white, cheap, plastic, flimsy stuff. I'm not a really big fan of like banning products and stuff, but this one I can make an exception for. This product should be banned. There's absolutely no good reason for it at all. Because it gets shredded up, the heat and drop, the heat, the dry, the cold, it tears. So you should have a bath fan. It should be going all the way to the outdoors. It shouldn't just be dumping like this right into the attic. It shouldn't just be going out to the soffit and like hoping that this air makes it all the way out there. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So you really want to use like a high quality rigid flex duct that's made out of metal, and make sure you get it all the way to the outside. Again, thinking about that indoor air quality problem, the main thing is to sort of step back and be like, all right, what's going on in my house that could make my house have, you know, bad indoor air quality problems. You're not gonna throw out all your plants, kick your kids out, give your pets to your neighbors, stop cooking. You know, like we need to live our lives in our houses. But the thing is just to realize that the things you're doing in your house, you know, like taking a 30-minute shower and not having a bath fan is going to produce a lot of moisture. Moisture is not that good when it gets that high, right? If you have a basement that looks like this, and the floor is like a reflecting pool because it's got 2 inches of water all the time, right? It's hard to see here, but there's like a plastic layer up here. I mean, there's just beads of water up underneath there and everything. I mean, this is, you would not want to go in the attic and start sealing up the attic, that house, because that problem is not going to get better. It's going to get worse. It's going to make really bad issues for the people that are in that house. So you have to be a little careful with this. All right. This isn't anyone's house here, is it? All right, good. Because a couple of years ago in Portsmouth, when I was doing this, by the way, thank you for showing up tonight. Really good attendance. A couple of years ago, I was in Portsmouth and only 2 people showed up. In Portsmouth, I was thinking it was going to be jam-packed because of all the people and all the money there and all the old homes. I think there was something else going on that night, a local event or something. But anyway, as I was doing my slideshow, the lady in the back was like, "Hey, that's my house." I had a picture of her house in my slideshow. I was like, "Oh, what are the odds of that?" You know, so So these are, really bad ice dams. You may have this going on in your house. This year was particularly bad for ice dams, but, what do you think is going on in these houses based on what we just talked about? It could be one thing, it could be another thing, or it could be both of those things together. What's the first thing it could be? Not enough heat loss, like not enough insulation, right? So it could be heat loss, so there might only be 2 inches of insulation on the floor there, maybe 4 or 6, right? But what if I told you they went crazy and they put 2 feet in insulation? That's more than you need. And it still looks like that. What else could it be? That's the second thing we talked about, the other way that hot air gets into your attic. The leaks, right? So there could be like a whole bunch of recessed lights. Well, I imagine there wouldn't be sprinkler heads like this, but there's 2 chimneys, right? So there could be big chases around those chimneys. So there could be a lot of insulation in there. It could just be that the warm air in the house is getting up into the attic through the insulation, and then it's starting to melt the snow up here. Because you can actually see the ribs here of like the framing. So the snow is starting to melt, and it comes down here and it gets to the edge where the roof is cold, which that's the way the roof is supposed to be. It's supposed to be cold. It's just that part of the roof is not supposed to be getting liquid water in January, February. And then you get this massive ice jam up here, and it starts to back up onto the shingles. Sometimes it comes into your house through the drywall. Obviously, if these things fall down, I mean, it'll crush you, it'll crush a car. It'll kill your dog, that's for sure. Like, this is really super dangerous stuff. So, I mean, sunlight does have something to do with this, so you have to be a little careful because not every ice dam is completely caused by heat loss. But in most people's houses, if your house looks like this and you're living there and you have heat in the house, this is probably mostly because the heat is getting somewhere where it's not supposed to get to. And then the snow is melting, when it's not supposed to be. So hopefully you've learned enough to know that, this is not the safe, easy way to get rid of those ice dams. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm a pretty physical, in shape guy, but I do not want to get my big boots on and my parka and my gloves and hat and then get my big ladder out and then get a 50-pound sack of salt and put it on my shoulder and go up the ladder and try to sprinkle this stuff on there. I mean, I suppose technically it's not false advertising because, yeah, if you put that stuff up there, it will melt the ice. But what's going to happen in 2 weeks when you get another snowstorm? You get another ice dam because this is just a one-shot deal. Like it's a one-time thing, right? So I always kind of chuckle when I see these ads at some of these hardware stores. It's kind of misleading. It's not really getting at the root cause of the problem. So again, going back to those ABCs, attic is the place you start with. You want to make sure your attic is fully insulated like this, not like this. And it's pretty important that you get in there and you do some air sealing first, because if you put all the insulation in at that point, it's pretty hard to find all the places where they're leaking. It's a lot easier to do that when it looks like this and take care of that. And then you can insulate. So air seal first and then insulate. Again, and start in the attic. Then you go to the basement. Oh, talking about air sealing. So what does the air sealing look like? Around a chimney, that has to be done really specifically because it's a chimney. So this is actually metal. That's fire caulk. This is just like it's called a can cover. It's almost like a chef's hat that goes over recessed light. And you can just like foam that in with this kind of stuff, this gooey foam. But you really don't want to use this kind of stuff over here because that kind of violates the fire code and things. That's a sort of a special situation where they did a big skim coat of spray foam because it was just so leaky that it was easier just to do that across the whole thing. If you have a drop down stair, when you pull a drop down stairs down, you should not be able to look right up in your attic. There should be a really nice insulated cover. You can see this one's got some really good weather stripping around there. It's actually more important that this is weather stripped better than the front door, because the front door is actually going to be less leaky than this is. This is the highest thing in the house. There should be an insulated cover like this. This is made out of that rigid foam board I showed you. We kind of stack up, 3 layers or 4 layers of this 2-inch stuff here to make a cover over it. If you have to store stuff in your attic, there's ways of making storage, but this costs a lot of extra money to do this. I usually try to get people to like get rid of their stuff, put it somewhere else, and then we can just put a barrier around the little access. And then insulate the whole entire attic and get it really, really protected. These are professional installations here, but you know, if you're really handy, you could probably pull something like this off yourself. If you live in a cape, you know, capes sort of have like that little neat triangular knee wall space in the front or the back, or sometimes both. This is a house I was in recently in Portsmouth that had, this is the back of the knee wall, and that's the floor, and like that's plaster and lath. I mean, there's no insulation whatsoever. So sometimes that gets done with spray foam. Sometimes it's other things, like this is where we did it with that rigid foam board again. In this case, we did the slope. Sometimes it's better to do the wall and the floor, so it can get a little tricky trying to figure out like where the best place to do this work is, but these are just kind of different examples of, you know, things you can do. Going down to the basement, you know, this is the, you know, like I told you, there's that's a bulkhead door. You can see the light coming through, right? That doesn't mean the bulkhead door is bad. Because bulkhead doors are designed to keep out water and like raccoons and bad people and bad critters, right? But light comes through, so air can come through. So that needs to be sealed. The best way to do it is to just, you know, have a door there. So in this case, we just sort of built the door out of plywood and that rigid foam board, some good weather stripping. It's a lot cheaper than like, you know, trying to buy a door and put a door in there. You can imagine how hard it would be to find a door that would fit in that door, in that space too. Like it's kind of a unique shape and size, so kind of a custom thing. Walls in your basement, you know, you want to have a good thermal barrier on the four sides of your house, the top and the bottom. But when we say bottom, we usually don't mean the ceiling of the basement. Usually it's better to do the walls of the basement, because your basement has pipes and stuff hanging down, or ductwork. You have a boiler, you might have a washer and dryer. It's kind of like it's conditioned space, it's heated space. You might not be trying to heat it, but it's probably kind of like warm down there. It's not as warm as your living room probably, but it's not freezing cold. So if that space is being heated by you, even unintentionally, you know, you darn well want to insulate that. If you have a really smooth concrete wall, you can use something like this. This actually has a foil face on it, so you can actually put this up and leave it like that. For fire code reasons, this is okay. You would not want to use like pink or blue board to do this, because it says right on there, like you're not supposed to leave that exposed. Some people have like granite, brick, boulders and stuff, you know, like this kind of thing. That kind of needs to be spray foamed. You really can't, you know, get this to go in and out of bricks and boulders. So it's a lot of different ways of doing basements. Again, so A, B, then we go back to C. Again, there's not a whole lot I would worry about there. They do have, you know, flue blockers. You can get what's called a chimney balloon, which is just like what it sounds like. It goes up there and it expands out. Some weather stripping on the doors, but again, I wouldn't worry about that stuff until you do the A and the B. If you have an older house that actually has empty walls, they shouldn't be empty, they should be full. This is something that you definitely don't want to try to do yourself, because the machinery that you might get at like the hardware store is not made for this kind of thing. It's pretty tricky. You got to take siding off, you got to drill holes, you got to feed the thing up, and it takes quite a bit of skill. So I would definitely sort of recommend that you get some professional help if that's something you want to get done. Somebody on Zoom asked about ducts, right? So if you have duct work, you want to seal it, not with duct tape. I know that sounds weird, but I don't know who called duct tape, but it's absolutely terrible for using on ducts. After just a few months, it starts to peel off and it loses its stickiness and everything. So you want to use this stuff called mastic if you can. It's like this goopy stuff. And you can use a brush or a stick or even just your hands with a glove, and you want to seal up all the cracks, because the air inside that ductwork is really expensive air. It's either really hot, you're trying to get it to your rooms, or it's really cold if it's air conditioning. So you don't want that leaking out, right? So yeah, and this is an old way they used to do ductwork, like in the basement and ceiling. You can see all the big, huge gaps and stuff there. You're not even allowed to do that anymore by code, but so yeah, ductwork can sort of present its own little special challenges, but can be done. There's no window salesman here, are there? I don't want to insult anybody, but, yeah, windows are, like I said, they're terrible. And window salesmen, they must take some kind of different kind of math or building science courses than everyone else takes, because somehow they talk people into spending lots and lots of money on new windows to save on energy. And the reality is they don't really save a lot of energy. Even if you got a triple paned krypton or argon filled window, the best window you could possibly buy, it would only be like R6 or R7, which is not that much higher than R4 or 5, which is what you have here, like in a library, or what you might have in your house. Even if you have an old single pane window from the 1800s, you can do something like what this guy's doing here. You can get an interior storm built, you can put that in there, and you kind of essentially just made a double pane out of single pane for a fraction of the cost of like a brand new window. Thermal curtains, cellular shades, there's all sorts of things you can do to improve a window, and it's a lot less money than replacing the window, and it does almost the same thing. Some people are like, oh no, but like my windows are leaking like crazy. Like, yeah, feel it. And they bring me over and I feel, oh yeah, you're right. Oh yeah, you're right. I feel cold air coming in every single one of your windows. But my ears aren't popping. I mean, if there's air coming in every window, then the house should be getting pressurized. And my ears should start to hurt after a while. Either that or the house should be swelled up like a big balloon from all the air coming in. But that never happens. So when there's a lot of cold air coming in around an old window, again, that means that there's somewhere else up here where hot air is leaving. And usually the better way to do it is to figure out where the hot air is leaving, fix that problem. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, this window doesn't leak that much anymore. It's like voodoo almost. You can improve a window by staying away from it and going up in the attic, you know.
What about window weather stripping?
It can be done. It can be kind of tricky to get it to be in the right place and get the window to still work and everything. So again, and it's not, the windows typically aren't the leakiest part of the house, and they're more of a sign that there's a problem somewhere else. All right, so hopefully this is kind of what most people are like at this point in their head. So let's talk about kind of getting, help on this stuff. One of the things you might want to do is get an energy audit done. Again, that's what I do. Like, my day job is doing energy audits for people. It's never like just going up into someone's attic, getting a measurement. Oh, it's, 800 square feet and you have this much, you need this much, blah, blah, blah. Like it's way more than that. We go down into the crawl spaces, we get into the knee wall spaces. We do a bunch of safety testing on your hot water system and your heaters, your furnace, your boiler. At the end, you're going to get like a written report that will have all the findings, like here's where the deficiencies are, here's where the improvements can be made, possibly even like, well, here's what it would cost to do it, here's a couple different ways of doing it. So it's a really good thing to get done to your house. Again, in New Hampshire, anybody could say, I'm an energy auditor. Like there's no state guidance or licensing or certification. So it's up to you to do some homework and get someone who is certified and experienced and knows what they're doing. So you want to look for some certifications. BPI is the sort of the biggest one nationally. There are some other ones. There's like ResNet, there's other ones, but you're going to want to probably ask them about, do they use a blower door, which we'll talk about here in a minute and stuff. If you're trying to find people that are qualified to do this, you can contact REPA is a nonprofit group that has people who are qualified and trained and certified in it. You could also contact NHSaves. Even if you don't qualify for the program that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, you could call them and say, look, I didn't qualify, but can you give me the list of people you guys use? And they'll send you a list of contractors that they use in the program, because they only use people who are like BPI certified and vetted and sort of, approved people. So it's kind of important that you do that, because there are a bunch of sort of like, I don't know, Tom, Dick, and Harry fly-by-night outfits that, like, yeah, we do, but they don't have to know what they're doing, I guess is what I'm saying. One of the things that you might get done if you get an audit is a blower door test. Blower door test is basically like a big fan that we set up in the doorway, and then you close all the windows and doors and you crank up the fan and you blow air out through the fan. So what it does is it pulls air in through gaps and cracks and holes and things, and it sends it out through the fan. And then you can actually look at this machine here and find out like how much air is going through the fan. And whatever's going through the fan, as long as the windows are shut, is how much air can come in and out of your house. So it's a way to actually like measure how leaky is your house. You can also use it to help find the leaks too. So it's a really cool tool. The only time you can't get a blower door test done would be like if you have something like this in your attic. This is vermiculite. This is an insulation material they used back in the day, until they found out that it could have asbestos in it. But there's, I think about 10 million homes in the country that have this stuff in it. So you can't run a blower door test if you see this. You can still get an energy audit done, you just can't get this done. Technically speaking, every new house in New Hampshire is supposed to have somebody come out here, set this thing up and run that test. And there's a certain number they have to get on that machine for the person to move into the house. I mean, that's what the building code says. But not every town is enforcing it. So that's where that stands. Typically what we would do is we would do this before during an audit, you do this, you get a number, you figure things out. And then at the end of the project, after you do all the work we just talked about, you come in and you run it again and it should be lower. If it's not lower, if it's higher, that means you left the window or something open. So it's a really neat tool. Speaking of energy codes and things like that and blower door tests, believe it or not, this house here, I'm sure this isn't anyone's house here because this house is not around here, but that's like Winnipesaukee back there. This is one of the worst houses I've ever been in. And I've been in a lot of, I've been in houses from like 1740. This house is worse than the house of 1740, believe it or not. Absolutely horrible. And the big, major, huge issue with this house would have been found immediately if they had just run a blower door test after they built it. But the town here doesn't require it, so they just built the house. And these people had ice dams that were so bad. It was like that picture I showed you before. So when I went there in the wintertime, not it was nice like this in the summer. They had buckets and Tupperware containers in their living room because the water was coming in through because the ice dams were backing up water, the shingle, and it's terrible stuff. This was kind of a funny situation I had where I ran that blower door test, and I told you how it works. Like it sucks in, so it blows out, and we heard a big bang upstairs after I turned it on. And the homeowner's like, "What was that big bang?" And I was like, "Oh, that's probably just your dog running around, your cat." She's like, "No, I don't have any pets." I was like, "Oh yeah, you're right. Shoot. Well, it might have just been a door because it'll actually open and shut a door if there's enough air coming through." Well, we went upstairs and we're looking around and all the doors were still open. So I was like, "Yeah, that is kind of weird. What was that big bang?" And then I go in the bathroom, and this is the mirror in the bathroom. It was in the sink because I suctioned it right off the wall because behind it was just a big gaping hole going right into an attic. And she's like, "Well, this was a flipped house that I just bought." And I'm like, "Oh my God." Like, and I looked at the property tax card. The house was built in like 1958. So in my mind's eye, I can picture like the medicine cabinet from 1958. And the house flipper was like, "Oh, get rid of that thing, throw it in a dumpster." And then what's the cheapest thing to do? "Oh, just, put a nail over that. We'll just get a little mirror and put a mirror over it. No one will ever know." The ice dams behind that in that section of the house were horrible because that attic in there was probably 60 or 65 degrees in the wintertime because all the air was going around the mirror and then going into that space. Of course, when I turned my fan on, I reversed the flow there and I pulled it right off the wall. That's really rare. Something like that usually doesn't happen. And I'm not superstitious or anything, but it didn't break, as you can see. But I don't like to break people's things, so it's like. Another thing that you might see if you get an audit done is an infrared camera. In the movies, people will hold up an infrared camera to like a door or a window, and they're like, "Oh, there's 3 bad guys in that room," or something. Like that's not the way that infrared cameras work at all. They're really simple. All they do is they tell you the temperature of the surface you're looking at, and then it's up to you to figure out, like, well, what's going on there? Why is it like that, right? So when I was in this house and I was looking at this wall, like. They had this little cute home sign, right? But the HO is different color than the ME, and that's a different color. Like there's 3 or 4 different colors there. And that shouldn't be like that. It should all be one color. And that wasn't even an outside wall. That was actually like an inside wall. So it's like, well, there's something going on there, This house over here, you can see all this purple, that's purple is cold, you don't want to see a lot of that. This whole area here is freezing cold, and lo and behold, right below that, bath. Guess what? 2 years in a row, they had frozen pipes in that bathroom. I'm like, well, yeah, no wonder that the whole space above it is freezing cold. In the summertime, you can hold it up and look at a beam that's way up on the ceiling. And you can see, like, it was summertime, so there was hot air coming in around the beam. That's why it's all yellow. So in the wintertime, that would be, warm air leaving, but I can see the warm air coming in with the infrared camera. So it's kind of a neat way to figure out like what's going on, if there's missing insulation in a wall, if there's air going in. So that's kind of a neat tool you want to see. As I mentioned, in an energy audit, they always test for combustion safety things. So one of the big things we're looking for is carbon monoxide. If you don't know about carbon monoxide, it's odorless, tasteless. You have no idea it's there, but every time something burns, whether it's propane or natural gas or wood or oil, there's a little bit of carbon monoxide. If your heating system or your hot water system is not working correctly, it can make a lot of carbon monoxide, and that can make you really sick, or it can kill you. I don't know how many people this winter got killed by carbon monoxide, but there's a bunch. And it's not, and I'm talking about like, accident, not dummies like running a generator in their house or something like that. Like that's just sort of like just dumb, but these are like innocent people that didn't know. They're like, oh yeah, snow comes off the roof and covers the exhaust from my furnace. It's gonna back up into the house, So this is an atmospherically drafted water heater, kind of old one, right? So the idea is that the exhaust gases are supposed to go up and out of there, and it's supposed to be drawing air in from the room, but in certain situations, could be a squirrel nest or something up there at the top. We can actually make it so that carbon monoxide can spill out. So, long story short, definitely make sure you have a CO detector in your house, at least one. I would recommend one for every floor. Heating systems, sometimes people are like, oh yeah, that thing works great. No one's looked at it in 20 years and it's still going. It's like, you do not want to let your heating system go for that long. Like, it should get serviced and tuned up every year, no matter what, right? Yeah, you want to focus on the building first. Usually, you want to make your house as insulated as it can be and as tight as it can be, and then you start thinking about, oh, well, maybe I should get a better boiler or a better furnace or a different kind or something like that. But those are really big ticket items. They cost a lot of money, and if you get a boiler that's, I don't know, say 88% efficient, and the one you had was 82% efficient, well, that's a little bit of a gain. But if your house is leaky as anything, it's kind of like putting water in a bucket with holes. Like, it's sort of stupid. You want to fix the holes first, right? So kind of important to do all that stuff, first. All right, let's talk about some of these rebates. We're not going to spend much time on all these other ones. This one at the end here is the one I really want to focus on. So we'll just kind of fly through some of these other ones. They do have incentives for higher efficiency boilers and things like that. You can go to NHSaves.com. You can find out about that. This IRA, I guess we gotta get rid of that. That doesn't apply anymore. You mentioned you have a heat pump in your house. You like it? The library has one. Yeah. So heat pumps are really becoming popular for good reason. They run on electricity, which for some people is kind of scary because electricity is expensive, but they're super efficient. They're like way more efficient than any other kind of boiler or furnace that you can get. They're super efficient. They work really well. They even work down to like -20. This one happens to be like what the ductless one, where you have a little thing on the wall. This one looks like it's probably integrated into the duct system. There's a bunch of rebates for those two. Does anybody have electric heat here in this room? You do? Oh, sorry.
And a wood stove in the new.
Okay. So one good thing about having electric heat is that, so if your neighbor has propane or oil and they want to get a heat pump put in, they get their rebate is, where is it? Right here, $250 per ton. So the average house might be like a 3-ton system. So you would get a $750 rebate. But if you got a 3-ton heat pump, you would get $1,250 per ton. So your rebate would be $3,750 for the same thing that your neighbor got, and your neighbor got a lot less, just because you have electric heat. because the utilities in this program are really trying to go after electric savings. So, they sort of sweeten the pot for people who have, electric heat for it, I think, or heat pump. So that's definitely something I would look into. The other good thing about getting heat pump is that it not only makes heat, but it also makes air conditioning, right? So, if you're gonna put a bunch of money into a boiler or a furnace, all you're gonna get is heat in the winter. You still have to have something in the summer for air conditioning if you want it. Where a heat pump kind of does both. That's new construction. Anyway, yeah, we're gonna go to this one. This one's called the Home Energy Performance Program, or HEP. And this is for houses that are not new houses, like this is our existing houses, right? Basically, you have to qualify to get into it, not by being poor or rich or anything like that, or a nice person or a bad person. All you have to do is provide your the size of your house and how much you use to heat your house, and that's how you get in. It's kind of like trying to figure out which houses are using the most energy, right? So you get on their website, which I'll show you in a second. If you get into the program, then you get your audit ends up being free. And that's about I don't know, anywhere between $300 or $500 value for free. But the best thing is that if you're going to get insulation and everything done in your house, they'll actually pay for 75% of it, all the way up to $6,000. So it's a really neat program. It's really good. They also have some low interest financing for the part that you would have to pay too, which is really cool. So anyway, so you go to the website. What I tell people to do is just like go to Google, because you can find it by going through NHSaves, but it's really clunky and it takes forever, I think. So I would just go to Google or something and just type in NHSaves test your home, and you'll probably get a page like this. Sure.
I went on to try to see if we qualify, and
Yeah.
they were requiring that you have programmable thermostats in your house. I have 4 heat.
But I think there must be either a mistake on there, or maybe you misread it. There wouldn't be a requirement. They might say that they want to put one in your house. But
Yeah.
is that through, you have Unitil? I'd have to look at it. That doesn't sound right, but I'll take a look at it. So usually you go to the website and you get this page, test your home. So if you get to this page, you're on the right track. And then you click here, test your home, lo and behold, then you get this page here. So what you have to do is you have to type in who your electric utility is, who your zip code is, and then how many square feet you have that's heated. That might be what your property tax card says, but it might not be, because some towns actually will what they call living space. Sometimes it's not heated space, right? So just be careful that you only have to report the square footage that's actually heated. So this person lived in Eversource territory. That's their zip. Their house was 2,000 square feet. And it says, well, what do you use for heat? And this person said, I burn 800 gallons of oil, and I also have a wood stove, so I burn 2 cords of wood, and that's it. It asks you over here, do you have electric heat? Like for you, you would say yes. Then it would give you a bunch of other questions here that you have to do. But this person said, no, I don't have electric heat. I don't have a heat pump. This is all I have. I just have a furnace or a boiler and a wood stove. So you put that in there, and then you hit go. By the way, if you have more than, some people have like a boiler that uses oil, and they have a wood stove, and they have like a propane heater in their room or something. So you might have more than 2 sources. Unfortunately, this thing will only let you put in 2. So if you have 3, you just got to call the utility and they'll work it out with you and they'll figure out a way of doing it. But you want to include every heat source that you have, right? So you put it all in there, and then you hit go, and then it's going to give you, it'll like calculate what's called your HHI, which is your home heating index. And it's if you're kind of efficient, it'll be down here. If your house is pretty inefficient, it should be way up here somewhere. In the old days, no matter where you lived in New Hampshire, an 8 was the cutoff. Like if you have an 8 or above, you're in the program. If you're less than 8, sorry, it looks like your house is pretty good. Unfortunately, these days, for whatever reason, in the last couple of years, all the different utilities have started doing their own thing. So they still call it NHSaves, which to me it sort of implies that it's like a consistent, uniform program, but unfortunately, it's not anymore. So, like if you're Eversource, you have to get at least a 6 on here. If you're Liberty Electric, you got to get all the way up here to 10. If you're NHEC, you only have to have a 4. Unitil is 8 right here. If you utility gas, it's 9, it's a little bit higher, so it kind of depends on like who your utility is and everything. Which is kind of a bummer, but that's the way it is right now. The thing about these numbers too is they change sometimes, right? So I had a couple customers recently who tried to get in like 2 years ago and they didn't qualify. But now like we'll try again because Eversource, like it used to be 8 or 9, and now they dropped it to 6. So that same house might actually get in now, but it didn't get in 2 years ago. It's also, this winter was way colder than the other winter we had 2 years ago, so it depends on your usage, right? Anyway, that's how that works. I have a customer right now who's like right on the cusp of, and I'm like, well, just, I'm like, how much oil's in your tank? They're like, oh, it's been like a month. Like, we'll just call them up and have them deliver another one, like if they deliver another, fill up the tank again, that might be just enough to push you over. But they want 12 months worth of heating fuel usage, and that's how you get into the program. Notice it never asks you, how much is your house worth, how much do you make, and it has nothing to do with your income or anything like that. All it is how much fuel you use, how big is your house. So one other unfortunate thing is that if you're the kind of person that's like really trying to save money or trying to save energy, and you turn your thermostat really low, you have your kids dressed with earmuffs and thick pajamas and stuff to try to. You might not get in because you might be down here. So it's sort of, it's a way for them to sort of really get the houses that are using a lot of energy. Anyway, so that's what that looks like. Like I said, if you don't get in, here it says proceed to the enrollment form because this person definitely got in. If you don't get in, I would say wait a little bit, make sure that you're putting in the right numbers. So you get in, you get an audit done, and then out of that audit, you get a report. It's a big, long, like 10-page report, but one of the pages that you'll get in the report is sort of like the contract page, I guess you'd call it. And it lists all the different things that the energy auditor said should be done. For instance, the first one here is 660 square feet of attic floor insulation. We're going to go from 3 inches up to 18 inches. So when they type that in there, the computer software says, okay, it's going to cost $2,800, but the utility is going to pay $2,000 of it. So the customer only has to pay like a small fraction of that. The blower door is going to go, it was $2,287 when they ran it. The thing could come down to $1,500, so they pay for that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you look at this like as a whole down here, this whole project is a little over $8,000. But the utility is going to kick in $6,000 towards that project. So the homeowner's only left with this. Now, if you're the kind of homeowner that sees this number, you're like, geez, I can't do that. You can always call up the energy auditor and say, hey, I got your report. Looks good. Thank you. I want to do it, but I don't have much money. I have like 1,000. The auditor can go in and like adjust this a little bit. Maybe they'll get rid of this item. This is putting that Thermax rigid foam board on the rim joist in the basement, right? Well, that was $650. So like, if they get rid of that one, that's going to bring these numbers down. So you can get your copay down to like 1,000 less. Most of the utilities also have a 0% financing program. So as crazy as it sounds, like they would pay $6,000 of this project for you completely, and then they would pay your $2,000 for you. And then they put it on your electric bill for 2 years at 0% interest. So they kind of give you the money ahead of time for free. And then you pay it back slowly over time with no interest. So even if your electric bill goes up a little bit each month, this project here is estimated to save $800 a year. So you can probably afford to have your electric bill go up a little bit because you're going to be saving $800 on, well, it doesn't say whether it's propane or oil, but it's one of those. Right? So anyway, this is just sort of like a sample page of what it might look like. One cool thing about this is that these amounts, the energy auditor doesn't have to do the math for this. Like I measured the attic at 660 square feet and it's got this much insulation and we want to go to this much. I just type that into the computer software and it spits out the price. It's the same for every customer in the whole state of New Hampshire. It doesn't matter if it's like a little dilapidated 800 square foot cottage or if it's a 7,000 square foot ultra modern house right on Rye Beach or something. Everyone is going to pay $2,844 for that installation. It's the same for everything.
We have a Zoom question.
Sure.
my electric usage is low, would that disqualify me and seem to use more in the way of propane?
No, so this, like, if you go back to this page here, it doesn't, unless you have electric heat, you're gonna answer this question, no. And it's not even gonna ask you for your electric usage. It's only gonna ask you for your propane. Assuming this person doesn't use electric for heat. Now, if they have electric for heat, then you would click yes here and you can add in that electric. And they would actually take that into account. But it's just looking for like the fuel that you use to keep your house warm. Thank you, good question. One other interesting thing about this program is that it's run by your electric meter, not your mailing address. Which basically means if you live in like a duplex, either up and down or left and right, A and B, if there's 2 electric meters, that means each tenant or each apartment or each electric meter can get a $6,000 rebate. So like we worked in a house in Newfields recently that it was a big old colonial and the person split it up into 4 apartments. And like most landlords do, they want to give everyone their own electric bill. So the landlord doesn't want to pay the electric bill. So each person pays their own bill. There's 4 electric meters. That house got 4 separate rebates from Eversource of $6,000 each. So they got, close to $20,000 to improve that house. Now, if it was just a family living there and there was only 1 electric meter, they would only have gotten one $6,000 rebate. So it also will work if you're a renter, if you're not an owner. You have to work it out, obviously, with your landlord, because you wouldn't want to like get all this work done and not get permission from your landlord. And you wouldn't want to pay for it either. Your landlord generally is going to be the one to pay for it. But so if you're a renter, you can still do it. You don't have to own your own home. The work has to be done to a certain standard, right? So after, if this was our job and we did this job, I have to go back in afterwards. I have to run the blower door test. I have to do the combustion safety testing on the water heater and the boiler and the furnace. I got to look at all the work, make sure it looks good, make sure the homeowner's happy, make sure there's no messes. And then the utility actually has the right to send their own QA inspector in to inspect it, to measure the attic and see like, is the attic actually 660 square feet? And okay, they said they put in 18 inches. Did they actually they're going to measure it, see like, did they put it in, right? So again, it's another thing that is kind of comforting for a lot of people because the price is a fair price. You're not getting ripped off. Because if you're getting a heat pump or gutters or a new roof, like those people can charge whatever they want. But a lot of times they will charge based on like how expensive is the car in the driveway. And does it have Massachusetts license plates or New Hampshire plates? That's the famous one. So in this program, standard pricing, work has to be done to the good specs, good standards, and it could get inspected. So there's kind of a lot of really reassuring things about that, I think.
Does the work, do you have?
Yeah, the contractor it's the same contractor through the whole process. So that way you don't have to deal with you don't have to like get 3 different quotes and stuff. And it's like, this is what it is, right? So like whatever company that they send to your house, they do your audit and then they do the work and then they inspect it at the end. Which when I first got into this, I thought was a little bit suspicious, that the auditor that did the initial assessment works for the same company that does the work. It just seems like there's a little bit of room there for some funny business, but now that I've been doing it for a long time, like there's a lot of eyes on the project, like if we said we're going to do 660 square feet and we're going to put in 15 inches, like it has to be that. You can't mess around. You can't overcharge. You can't do funny things like that. So. What else can I tell you? Oh, there's also a program for low-income folks, right? So in this program, it does sort of depend on how much money you have or how much money you make. You could contact the CAP agency or you can dial 211, you get information about that, or the fuel assistance program if you're into that program. In this situation, they actually pay like 100% sometimes of all the work. So not just 75, but 100%. But the catch is you have to qualify by having certain income guidelines. And in some parts of New Hampshire, there's actually kind of a waiting list for this program, which is kind of sad because those are the people that kind of need it the most, and their demand is higher than they're able to do it. But it's the same kind of work we just talked about, air sealing, insulation. They even do things like upgrading boilers and furnaces, sometimes even windows and stuff. There's also, I don't have a slide for it because it's new, but well, you guys are Unitil, but Eversource also has this new program called the Moderate Income Program. That's this little card here. If you know anyone that is in Eversource territory, the Moderate Income Program is kind of a new thing they started. And they actually pay, instead of paying 75%, they pay 100%. So I don't know a whole lot about this program. We haven't done any work in this program, but this one is income dependent. So it says like here, like I don't know, number of households. If you have 4 people in your house, you have to make less than 133,000 to get into this program. So there's like an income part of this program, but the one I just told you about, there is no income like verification or anything like that. So just wanted to throw that out there in case you knew somebody. Let's see, there's some other things in here about some other programs that we're going to skip through because they're not really going on. I think that just about covers it. Wanted to make sure I left you with my number and my email. If you have any questions that come to you, well, if it's the middle of the night, don't text me in the middle of the night, please. I usually turn my phone off, but yeah, wait till the morning. But I'm certainly more than happy to help anybody who has questions. I'll be around for a few minutes afterwards to answer questions if people have them. Again, there's refreshments still. There's a lot of brochures. If you know any other people in any other towns that you think might benefit from this kind of workshop, you can put them in touch with PlymouthEnergy.org and they can, I think there's funding for like maybe 3 or 4 more of it for the rest of the year. We're getting ready to kind of take a break for the summer because these things tend to not be very popular in the summer. We start up again in the fall. But we are looking for a couple towns to do a few more of these in. Question in the back.
If you're gonna hire someone to do a mini split.
Yeah.
Are there things to look for? They need to show that?
Good question. So again, with mini splits and water heaters and things like that, they can charge whatever they want, first of all. So it's definitely in your best interest to get a couple different quotes. And just do some homework and ask some good questions, maybe get some recommendations,
Is the technology pretty standard from like contract to another in terms of, I don't know, whatever. the equipment-
No, I would say overall, I would say no. I mean, the equipment is semi-standard, but the installation is actually can vary quite a bit. Let's put it that way. I actually went to a workshop a few months ago with the Mitsubishi rep. They're one of the bigger heat pump producers. And while we were taking a coffee break at the table, I pulled out my phone and I was showing the guy a couple of heat pumps that I took pictures of at people's houses. And he was like, kind of like flipping. He's like, "Oh my God, those are terrible." He's like, "Oh, those are." I'm like, "Yeah, those are yours." He's like, "All right, we're gonna talk about that when we come back after the break. Like that we make a really good product, but we don't necessarily have a lot of control over how well they get put in." Mitsubishi, at least I know they have a level of service or contractor. I think it's called Black Diamond or something. Like apparently those contractors have to meet a little bit higher standard than other contractors maybe do. So like the one I was showing the guy, the outdoor unit, which is about the size, well, it's about as high as this and thick and wide. They put it on the deck in front of the sliding glass door. Yeah, I was like, wait, why didn't you just put it over like? And another one they put like right underneath a spot where all the ice and snow is going to come off the roof and just pummel it. And so there's quite a bit of variation in the quality and how these things are put in.
Are there like websites or some places that have good information for search that?
I don't know of any that really like tell you like which ones to steer towards or like I said, and most of them do free evaluations and free estimates. So you kind of have to just kind of get a feel for for instance, here's an example. I had a customer in Rochester recently. She told me that when she got new heat pumps, the guy came, they looked around the house a little bit, sold her on some heat pumps. She signed the contract, and then they came on whatever day. And, she heard the knock at the door. She went and answered the door. And the guys came in and they had boxes of stuff. And they came in like, "Okay, where do you want them?" And she's like, "What do you mean? Where do I thought you guys knew where to put them." And I told that Mitsubishi guy that. And he was like, "Oh, that's exactly right." I'm like, no, somebody needs to come to your house. They need to figure out like the heating load of the house, what you have for heat now, how big are the rooms, what the insulation level, they need to plan out where they're gonna go, like, you can't just throw these things in and expect them to work, you know? And when the people come on the day of install, they shouldn't be asking the homeowner where to put them, like, they should have a map and a plan, and they should know like already exactly where they're gonna go. So I thought that was kind of horrifying to hear that, I was like, that seems like a really shady kind of thing to do, you know? So yeah, there's a lot of variety out there, I guess is what I should say. And the rebate that you get for a heat pump is like a mail-in rebate afterwards, right? So you get your heat pump put in, you have to pay them usually like in full. And then after that, you fill out the paperwork, you get them to sign it, and they say, yeah, I put this in, you know, her house, and then you mail it out and get your money back, which is a little bit different than this program. Like I told you, like that $8,000 project, Eversource or Unitil, whatever, would pay that $6,000 directly to the contractor. And then you would pay your $2,000 to the contractor, but so you don't have to come up with all that money ahead of time, you know, and then get it back from them at the end.
They'd be eligible for that one.
Yeah, that would have to be eligible for, right? If you're gonna get a heat pump, you also have to make sure that the heat pump you're getting put in meets if you go to the NHSaves website, it'll list like all the different requirements that you have to meet to get a rebate. And there are some heat pumps and things that might not get a rebate because they're not like high quality enough or they're not efficient enough. That's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, it's on the NHSaves heating cooling. I actually had that issue with Unitil, ironically, a couple months ago. I got a heat pump water heater put in my house. I put it in myself. It's a heat pump, but instead of making hot air for the house, it makes hot water, right? I put one of those in, and when I went to get the rebate, they weren't going to give me a rebate because they said it wasn't efficient enough. They said it had to have a number of like, I don't know, 3.3 or something. And I'm like, I opened up my computer, I looked at the website, I'm like, no, it says right here, it's 3.0. And oh yeah, you're right, it is. And that, so I ended up getting my $750 rebate, but I kind of had to like push for it, fight for it. At first they weren't going to give it to me, you know? So you have to kind of do a little bit of research and do your homework. And, you know, if you know people that have had heat pumps put in, I would ask them, like, how did it work and everything? And did they do a good job? And, but yeah, unfortunately, I don't know of any resources that'll like really sort of rate them in terms of like, you know.
Other things, just general things like which side of the house you put on, like the southern side of the house or the northern side, or so that the unit is like not exposed, or is it?
Not really. No, I mean, usually it's a matter of, well, it's a little bit of aesthetics, like where you want, you know,
Yeah.
but it also like, you don't want to put it in the path of like where, if you have like a valley of the two roofs and snow, it's gonna put, like, you don't want to put it underneath that, obviously.
The pipe thing that, so the unit outside and then the thing that goes up.
Yeah.
Does that have to go straight all the time, or?
No, the line set that goes in the house is only about as big as my arm. And it can go straight in, it can go up and around, it can go through the attic sometimes. Usually it's on the outside of the house. But it can go in all sorts of different directions and stuff.
And so if it has bends and turns.
Yeah.
It still works.
Yeah, it can still, yeah. Like I said, it's really just a matter of sort of like doing some research and, you know, asking around, I guess. Any other questions on Zoom or anything that I can answer?
No, but someone said, thank you, that this presentation was very helpful.
Oh, it's good to hear. Thank you. Good. Like I said, I'll be here for a few minutes if anybody wants to stay and chat or has any specific questions. Feel free to take some cookies home with you. I think that's okay, right?
Absolutely.
11 squares that she made this morning are very good. And yeah, lots of brochures there. If you want to take a brochure home, feel free to do that. And I encourage you to, you know, see if you can get into this program.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.